Wings of silver, hearts of steel, Silverhawks. Tally ho! Welcome to the Bears Lair where we're doing a breakdown of Silverhawks. That's right. We have that newer by Ed Brisson series that we ended up having. And why are we doing this? For one specific reason. We have Thundercats X Silverhawks event going on. So we ended up making a deep dive into this series, breaking it down issue by issue. So before I do anything, I want to give you a heads up. There's going to be spoilers that's going to go on there. But I did leave a little bit of meat on the bones for you. This is covering the general most of the issues that we end up having. Also, I believe over on the 13th, we're going to end up having a trade which covers the first 5 issues of that. And if that's something you're interested into, why don't you head over to Panelbound Comics, give it an order, be able to use the discount code of 5th of Jack to save $2 off. If you happen to make an order with 4 or more books, use the code Jacket together instead, and that will save you 5% off their entire order. Orders of $30 or more ends up getting free shipping. Let's dive in and break down this little series. So over in the first issue, we get to introduce a Lieutenant Quick of the Interplanetary Force 8, preparing to take down a bad guy named Hardware. He is super confident and itching for some action. This is going to end up going to be something that he's going to regret. Maybe. Just maybe. Then we're going to go over to the Planet 10 in Limbo, where we have Manakalar infiltrating the prison to make a prison break. Why is that? Well, that's because that's the place that is holding his big boss, Monstar. So if you don't know who Monstar is the big villain of this entire series. Think of, well, in He-Man, you have Skeletor. In Thundercats, you have Mum-Ra. You think of those kind of villains that you end up having. The big overarching villain that you end up having out of this series. Flash right on over to where we see the last Silverhawk, Stargazer, retiring, having a retirement party that's going over with it with his old support crew. However, the celebration is short-lived where it gets interrupted with a news flash of a prison break happening over at the Penal Planet 10. Knowing that that's the place that they're holding Monstar, we end up having him watching and being worrying about that. But before we end up doing that, we flip-flop right back over to that Lieutenant Quick, and him ended up doing this takedown of Hardware. What he doesn't realize is that, or in his hasty reactions, I should say, he ends up going into a trap that Hardware has set. It ends up blowing up the building, but Hardware leaves just in time and goes in through it unscathed. A week later, we end up going over and being at the Silverhawks home base of Hawk Haven, where we end up having Stargazer going over to the violence and the chaos that Monstar has done since he's been released. He ends up talking about how they were able to reopen up the base because the entire police gave him a budget for it and gave him pretty much an endless budget to be able to get the new and improved Silverhawk team. So that means that the old team is a little bit jealous, but the big thing is he's like, well, you guys already know what we're going up against. We can't end up teaching that, but we got to upgrade because you guys are a little bit old to be able to do this. Or should I be saying a little bit experienced. At the end of this issue, we end up finding that we have a new Silverhawk being in play. And who is it? No other than formerly Lieutenant Quick, making him have his Silverhawk codename being Quicksilver. Over at the second issue, we end up going over to the Starship Casino, where we see the amazing Arceus finishing up his magic, followed by the opening act of Bluegrass and Melody, a music group named Electric Sky. As they play, we learn a quick history of Bluegrass and his affection towards his affection of Melody, how they're in a good relationship and everything. However, the crowd isn't feeling the music. Flashback over to Hawkhaven, where we learn that Quicksilver is trying to escape, and it takes the person of Stargazer to come over to calm him down. Lieutenant Quick informs that, or has been informed, at this moment that he is the only person that survived from that entire strike that takedown that they ended up trying to do in the previous issue. Stargazer decided to save his life because he was on the verge of death, and it took the project of the Silverhawks to make sure that they ended up saving him. This is when we end up having Condor that walks in, which is another Silverhawk. Well, I should say another senior Silverhawk, to take Quicksilver and put him underneath his wing, training him, getting him ready to go up against Monstar and his goons. But it's also important to say that he's going to have a little bit of upgrades that's going to be going on that Condor doesn't have. So it's going to be a nice little learning experience. We return back over to the casino where Bluegrass and Melanie noticed the character of Monstar being there at the casino and having the head boss of Poker Face. Conflicted, we have Bluegrass who talks to the magician of Arteus about reporting and leaving the casino. See, here's the big thing about that. He used to be a pilot of the Intergalactic Force 8. And if Poker Face ends up finding that out, that's going to be the ends of him. That's Bluegrass, however. So they end up deciding that they're going to end up leaving. And before they end up leaving, we have Bluegrass who wants to pick up Melody to be able to get her and, well, jet out of this place. However, she ends up double-crossing Bluegrass for the promise of, with the promise of having her name in the lights up in the sky by Poker Face. So we end up having Mumbo Jumbo attacks Bluegrass, and right before he could end up doing a fatal blow, Arceus shows up just in the nick of time, saves Bluegrass with some handy-dandy magic. They both find Bluegrass's ship and escape the casino. And this ends up wrapping up issue 2. In issue 3, we end up going over to the planet of memes with a couple officers, Emily and Will, to check out on the ships to make sure none of them belong to Monstar or none of the other henchmen. We also see a younger character following the bigger character is out in the open. The younger character is out in the back and hiding behind the trees and stuff like that. However, this bigger character that is out in the open this character ends up steering up a galactic storm and unleashes it on the planet. This storm sets up for something to hit Emily when her brother takes a hit, injuring him in the process. When we pop back over to Hawkhaven, we see Quicksilver training with the experienced Silverhawks and focusing on the training window where we have Stargazer, Arteus, Bluegrass overseeing it. Arteus drops a little bit of background and talks about how Monstar came to his home planet to be seeking for the Matrix orb, the source of his people's powers. Monstar had taken out all the holy men, including his brother. Just before he could end up wrapping it up, there's a transmission that interrupts it. It's Emily asking for assistance and is under attack from the villain, Windhammer. Stargazer summons up the Silverhawks and sends them out to help. So it's also important that these older Silverhawks are the only ones going out because, well, Quicksilver isn't quite ready. And they make the big pun that it's this Wind Raider, so it's going to be someone that they easily take care of. Showing up to the planet, they take down Windhammer very easily, but they didn't realize that it was a trap, and Monstar shows up, killing Silverhawks Redtail, Gray, and Sparrow. Before Monstar leaves, he wants to leave a message, and he's looking straight over at Osprey and says, "A war is coming." And it wraps up with Emily standing there, seeing all the chaos and the first edition that we end up seeing of the Mirage just showing up. Issue 4 opens up with Osprey laying on the table, recovering for her injuries that happened in the previous issue in the battle with Monstar. Stargazer's having regrets, sending the Silverhawks to their doom, and losing members of Sparrow, Gray, Redtail, and Osprey is in critical condition. Osprey tells him that there was nothing he could do and that he could not stop them. However, what he can do is make him pay for it. Stargazer gets summoned because there's a problem with Will. He is too damaged to be able to be saved under normal circumstances. This is when we end up finding out that Emily shares a special bond with Will. Wherever one of them feels pain, the other one feels pain. Whenever the other one's injured, the other one's injured. Which is kind of weird because Emily isn't injured at the time. But this ends up making it where they have to decide what they're going to end up doing. And the only way that they can save Will is turning him into a Silverhawk. So Emily, to save her brother, decides to go ahead to have the same fate since they end up having the same bond. However, we also get introduced to this little kid character that comes over that wants to be a Silverhawk. But Stargazer looks over at him and be like, "You're too young, you're too small, and you can't end up being a Silverhawk." 1 week later, we see Yes Men and Buzzsaw over at the one diner trying to get back Skyrunner. Because, see, Skyrunner ended up getting stolen by this unknown group. But these couple people end up having it and are trying to sell it back over to Monstar. What's the big thing about that? Well, Skyrunner is Monstar's mount. Think of like Skeletor with Panther, the character that they end up riding over on. Think about that kind of a style. But before the Monstar villains are able to attack these two people and taking them out, the new Silverhawks pop out and save them just in time. Skyrunner escapes and the Silverhawks were able to catch the character Buzzsaw. Another week later at Hawkhaven, the doctor was able to find the source of an energy leak that they were having at the base, and it turns out that it was the kid. He ended up repairing a thought to be non-working tank and make himself into a Silverhawk. So issue 5 is kind of a unique one. This is one where we end up seeing a flashback to where the more senior Silverhawks were there with Stargazer, and this is when they first captured Monstar, where they ended up having the trials and tribulations that we saw that above the way to be able to capture Monstar. Ultimately, it ended up being Stargazer missing an arm, takes the full energy, puts it right into Monstar. However, this doesn't take them out, this only knocks them out, and this makes them allowed to lock them up behind bars. And this is where he ends up going to the penal colony 10. You also see a passing of the torch towards the end of the issue where you end up seeing the pictures of the former thing and of the new Silverhawks. Coming back off from that issue, issue 6 goes with a flashback to 2268 at a place of Orem. It's under attack from Monstar and his goons. Why they are attacking this place that they are paid to protect? Well, it's because Monstar isn't happy with the amount that is getting paid in the deal that they ended up going. However, the ship goes down and see a kid, Arxeel, escape with his life to be able to fight another day. Back into the present day of Hawkhaven, we see Stargazer presenting the newest member of the Silverhawks, Hawk. Designed and built by the Copper Kid, so that's what that little kid ended up becoming. Only a day of work and is expected to build more bird companions for the group. Hawk is to help scout out the galaxy, helping to seeing something that their scanners cannot see. Specifically, it can't end up finding Brimstar, which is the home planet of Monstar, and also the source of his power. Also see a moment between Quicksilver, Stargazer about Copper Kid. He is too young and should be restricted to Hawkhaven. We also see a few other moments. One being where we see Osprey and Steelheart about to loss of being a Silverhawk. The fighting never ends. And another character moment between Steel Will and Condor, where Steel Will is kind of kicking himself because his sister ended up having to take on this burden and he's got used to the entire transition of becoming a Silverhawk. But you end up having Condor that says that he needs to, well, man it up. At this moment, we have Hawk who reports that Dalar is under attack and the Silverhawks are called into action. Silverhawks were too late to save the crew and the people of the planet. However, they end up finding out there's these like spider-like bombs, and with a handiness of Hot Wing, he ends up using his magic to bring them all into one area. However, he missed one, and an unknown person destroys the bot before it explodes. It is a grown-up version of Arxeel, and he wants to help rid the galaxy of Monstar. One more thing he knows is where Brimstone is. So that was the way that we ended up leaving the 6th issue. Now, let's dive on over to the 7th issue. We're coming over towards the end. The 7th issue, we see the Starship Casino getting blown up with the spider bots that we saw in the previous issue. And we see Poker Face, Mumbo Jumbo, and Melody fleeing the casino when they end up making it a beeline over to Brimstar to talk about it with the boss. Upon showing up, they bully right past Yes Man, and Poker Face ends up leaving Mumbo Jumbo to deal with Yes Man, and then we end up making it straight over to Monstar to inform him with the lack of satisfaction for the protection that Poker Face pays for. Monstar tries to figure out who is responsible for losing the casino, and his crew wheel up for action. Back on Hawkhaven, we see Hotwing having doubts about himself and worrying about if he's going to end up trying to kill Monstar, which is against his people's beliefs. However, Bluegrass promises that he will prevent that from happening, and Stargazer meeting up with Exil to make it something clear. Silverhawks don't kill. Then we see Exil bring up a third option with an orb. This entire black hole orb that it would capture anything within 1,000 limbo miles to be captured forever. No escape, and no one ever gets hurt. Sounds like a bold plan trying to get Monstar. And on that, and we jump right on over into the 8th issue, where it opens up with a reflective moment of what has been destroyed so far. We have the Sinistar Diner, Hardware's home planet of Sherlock, Monocular's laboratory planet of Adam 12, and Poker Face Starship Casino. Knowing those are all places that's under protection from Monstar, someone is targeting him, and the person is named the Revenant. Person that's Revenant, and it hasn't been revealed yet. That wasn't the only thing revealed. Also, Bluegrass wondered about if there was any survivors from the casino explosions. This is where he put that he still had feelings for Melody and hope that she would end up having a change of heart. This is where Stargazer goes over the plan to use Ezekiel's black hole orb to capture Monstar and his goons for once and for all. Over on Brimstar, we end up seeing Monstar with all of his goons talking about how they don't know who Remnant is and they need to take him out. And Hardware just finished the device to just do that. The Plague Machine fires an android rocket that on impact, it releases a bioagent that kills everything within the planet's atmosphere. A bit later, the focus goes to Bedlam City, where Monstar has taken over the channels and broadcasting looking for Remnant, and to give the planet 24 hours to bring him over to him, or it will be destroyed using this plague beam. Most of the Silverhawks load up into the Mirage and take off with Exil in his own ship in tow to go over to Brimstar to face Monstar to end his reign. After they left, the Copper Kid is over there to cleaning up the footage from the Dialar security. It wasn't taken up by Monstar, but Ezekiel. Dun dun dun! What a cliffhanger. In the 9th issue, we have Osprey radio over to the Silverhawks and put in a stop from the current mission to inform the newest realization and arresting of Ezekiel because they don't work with murders. Ezekiel debates with it for a bit and releases his pet over at Hawkhaven and reveals that he is the Reverend, delaying this, and then his pet ends up attacking Copper Kid and Osprey and Stargazer, and it ends up being a whole craziness that ends up happening. The delay gives time for Yes Man to be able to know that just outside of the orbit of Brimstar are the Silverhawks. For the first time in the series, we end up seeing the transformation of Monstar into its power-up version and to make his way out to face the Silverhawks. Oh man, it's not as good as Mum Rob, but it's pretty close. Back over to what we end up having. The Silverhawks break into 2 different groups, try to take on all the different fronts that they have. One being on Ezekiel, and the other one being on Monstar. However, we flash back to Hawkhaven where we see Rolly attacking Osprey, Stargazer, and Copper Kid. Ultimately, Rolly gets taken down, but it's not all good news because the Copper Kid has been critically injured. Back to the battle with Monstar, calls for Hardwire to fire the Plague Machine that's targeted over at Bat City. All of a sudden, bam! We see the beam being fired and it's on its way to Bedlam City. In the 10th issue, we see Condor trying to get the city of Babalama City and the entire planet to evacuate because the plague beam is on its way. That plague beam wipes out everything living. Then we flip back over to Brimstar where we have Ezekiel and Quicksilver duking it out. Quicksilver is telling how Silverhawks would have helped him before he ended up taking lives. Taking lives doesn't make Ezekiel any better than Monstar. And he crossed the line and he must go in. Sounds like a little like a Batman situation, but I digress. The next window that we end up seeing is Bluegrass versus Melody, where Melody has a cannon targeted on Bluegrass. However, at the very last minute, Hawk ends up taking it and making Melody's aim off, where she ends up hitting Poker Face's ship, making that ship go down due to the damage that was taken. Silverheart is taking on Hardware and trying to take out the weapon that shoots the Plague Beam before it gets used again. However, since the Bluegrass is all finished up with the one, he ends up bringing in the Mirage and blows up said weapon. Eventually, we have Ezekiel gets fatally wounded in the fight with Monstar and activates the orb. This puts a clock on them. Quicksilver tells Monstar that the Silverhawks can save him. He just has to turn himself in. Then we jump over to Hawkhaven, where we end up seeing Stargazer coming up with a plan to put Hawkhaven in the way of the beam. He has everyone evacuated from Hawkhaven and to prepare the base for the blow of the Plague Beam. The plan works, and everyone was able to leave Hawkhaven in time to not be affected by the beam, protecting Bamalama City from certain doom. Jumping back, where we have Monstar and his gang turning themselves in to make sure that they can end up, escaping this entire orb. So them and the Silverhawks end up leaving the reach of the orb. Eventually we see all parties, Silverhawks, Monstar with some jewelry, and then Stargazer, and then everyone wraps right back up, where we end up seeing them back on Bamalama in a classroom where everyone is grounded, but alive. Sadly, this leaves the former home of the Silverhawks, Hawkhaven, abandoned forever. Or does it? That's right, that ends up wrapping it up, and it says at the bottom that Silverhawks continues. And that's where we're going to end up seeing them continuing over into Thundercats Lost. That's where we're going to end up seeing. And that's going to be the next jog that we're going to end up having in our series right now that we're breaking down. If you don't know what Silverhawks is, it's another 80s cartoon that you can end up seeing. It was one of those that ended up being like a flash out of the pan. And it's another part of the entire universe that they ended up having with like Thundercats. It was another series that they ended up having. Series seemed like it was more of an origin series to be able to set up Silverhawks generally, because I don't really remember too much of the origins of each member from each episode that was over on that. So this was a nice way to be able to introduce it and get the band all together. And I'm kind of curious of how this is going to end up working over into the event of the Thundercats X Silverhawks. I don't know why they went X. Why didn't they just go Versus or something like that? But I don't get paid for the big bucks to be able to decide that. Again, this is going to be a longer episode that's going to be going on. And this is going to be definitely something that you're going to end up seeing going forward. Like I'm planning on doing on this series, we're going to have a background that goes over Thundercats Lost. And then we're going to have the steps that you have to go before Thundercats X Silverhawks event goes off. Then we're going to have the episodes for that. And then we're going to continue on. There's going to be three different books that's going to go on throughout the entire month. You're going to have Thundercats X Silverhawks. Then you're going to have Mom Raw, the Ever Living. And finally, you're going to have Thunderhawks. 3 different stories that's going to be part of the entire line. And if this is something that you're interested into, let us know down in the comments down below if you're liking this, because maybe we could do this with a few other series and have all the fun. So, thank you for watching, and until next time, we'll see you later.